Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at stories set in the Roman Empire and its periphery. Some of the material includes themes of violence or sexual assault. It is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snacks ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. Hello everybody, welcome back to season 3 of the Reading Party podcast. This is our Rome season. We are doing all things Rome, and today we are talking about the 2016 version of the movie Ben-Hur. I was telling Lexi, and I think I messaged her as soon as I finished watching the movie, I have many thoughts, which will surprise no one.
I am very excited to hear your thoughts. I mean, I had a lot of thoughts too. Can I just admit before we hear your thoughts, because I'm sure yours are going to be much more well thought out than mine. My only thought though is one, I forgot it was like half biblical. And also I'm like, what did like half the things with Rome have to do? It's either like mythological, army, or biblical. And I'm like, oh God, these are like...
Or they shoehorn Jesus in somewhere.
Right. And I'm like, oh, these are the tropes I hate. I'm like, I would like to get something Roman that doesn't veer into biblical at all. And that seems like a very tall order for some reason. And so I kind of, when I realized that that was what was happening, I just honestly watched it sort of in resignation. But I will admit, I was almost so just displeased by it that I played Tetris while watching it, so my concentration was very split. Like I'd seen it before just a long time ago, so it's not like I didn't pay attention, but I'm still just like, I needed Tetris to help me, because otherwise I was gonna either roll my eyes or just oh God. Yeah, it was bad. So I will sit back. I'm going to enjoy my green tea with pomegranate and listen to your thoughts and see if I can find something decent to interject.
Well, I'm going to try and do a whirlwind synopsis for those who've not watched it. But it's the story of a young Jewish man called Judah Ben-Hur and his adoptive Roman brother, Masala. And it opens with this lovely scene. They're racing horses. They're the best of friends. Judah gets injured. Masala rushes him home again. It's all very dramatic. He's fine. You find out that Masala is in love with Judah's sister, who is called Tirza. His mother is not thrilled by this. And very shortly after that, Masala decides that he is going to go and join the Roman army and kind of avenge his father's name. His father's done something. I can't remember what. It's not important. Masala ends up fighting in Germania and then other places, I don't remember where, and ultimately is sent back to Jerusalem. Well, the restless natives. This is like 3 years later, I think. Pontius Pilate is with him. He's his commanding officer. And Jerusalem is kind of in the middle of this like kind of tension thing. There are this group called Zealots who don't want Rome to be in charge of Jerusalem. And they're doing things like killing Roman officers. They're killing them because the Romans are desecrating grave sites to get the building materials out, which is a problem. Absolutely. And you find out that Tirza, Judah's sister, is involved somehow with these people. Judah is like, no, this is ridiculous. Everyone must be nice and calm. And let's just talk. Have you ever talked to a Roman? My brother is a Roman. He's a fantastic man. All this kind of thing, but ends up sheltering a zealot. This is important for the story later. He finds out that Masala's back because Masala kind of calls him, or summons him, I guess, as a Roman might do, to his garrison. I don't know what it's called. They have a very heartwarming reunion. Judah brings him home for like a dinner party thing. In the meantime, by the way, while Masala has been away, Judah has married a young woman called Esther, who is some kind of servant girl in his family's household. He's called a prince. I don't think Hebrews had princes at this point in history, but he's like a high-ranking Hebrew individual. And he's married a serving girl because her father betrothed her to a Roman. Very unlikely, historically speaking. And some of the synopses I read afterwards say she's a slave, which makes it even more unlikely. You wouldn't marry a slave. You'd just take her as your concubine. Anyway, moving on. He's married now. They're all very happy. They don't have any kids yet, but they're very happy. Masala comes, has dinner, still is very interested in Tisra. And he tells Judah, look, Pontius Pilate is going to parade through the city tomorrow. I'm under a lot of pressure to kind of just attack you guys. So could you make sure that this doesn't end in bloodshed? Just everyone be cool. Be cool. Judah's like, yes, of course. Masala's like, can you give me names of rabble rousers? And Judah says, absolutely not. So that's a point of contention. Pontius Pilate parades through the city and gets shot by the zealot that Judah has accidentally sheltered, which results in all of Judah's family being arrested. Judah is thrown in chains and taken to be a slave on a galley ship. His sister and mother are taken off, supposedly to be killed. And everything kind of cuts to Judah Ben-Hur in a galley, rowing for the Romans. It's all very dramatic. It's all very depressing. And he ends up telling other slaves, just do what the hell they tell you. You're not getting out. Just go with it. Ultimately, the ship that he's on gets sunk by the Greeks. Yeah, Greece. And Ben-Hur is the only survivor. He kind of washes up on the shores of, where does he wash up? The Mediterranean somewhere. He's right outside Jerusalem and gets rescued by the very famous actor whose name I can't remember.
Morgan Freeman.
He's God in, yes, Morgan Freeman. There we go. He gets rescued by Morgan Freeman, who is a horse trader. He trains horses.
No, he's a sheikh. He's a sheikh.
Thank you. There we go. Fantastic. I'm glad you were paying attention. And we find out that Judah Ben-Hur somehow is the horse whisperer. It's incredible. Had no idea. He ends up healing one of these horses and then like fixing a thing. It was long and convoluted. And actually it's horses, so Lexi's probably better positioned to discuss this anyway. But the guy who was going to race the horses races them, and the horse that was sick can't keep up with the rest of them, and Judah had told him to move where she is in the order, and he didn't because he knows better than a slave, and this ends up in the horses bolting. The guy who was driving the chariot gets run over. He's not dead, but he's not happy. And Judah is the one person who manages to catch them and slow them down because he's just that good with horses. The bond he has is just unshakable. Anyway, they end up going to Jerusalem, and Sheikh Morgan Freeman says that Judah should race in the Colosseum to try and either kill Masala or beat Masala. We're not sure. It's his way of like sticking it to the man, but Roman Hebrew style. Ben-Hur finds his wife. It's very exciting. She somehow has become attached to Jesus, who, by the way, helped Ben-Hur all the way at the beginning when he gets arrested. He kind of picks him up and gives him water. He's being marched down to the galley. So Jesus is kind of floating around in the background doing his carpentry thing in Jerusalem. Didn't happen. He was really only in Jerusalem for 3 days, so he wouldn't have seen Ben-Hur 3 years prior anyway. Well, not 3 days. He was only there for a couple of weeks. Anyway, this is ahistorical, is what we're getting at. So Esther, his wife, has kind of attached herself to Jesus. She's following him around and doing good works and giving money to the needy and food to the hungry and all the things that apparently you're supposed to do if you're following Jesus. So he finds her. It's very exciting. They're very happy. He wants revenge. She's like, what the fuck are you doing? No, you're going to get killed. Let's not do that. Let's just go follow Jesus around. Perfect. Good idea. Well done. It doesn't happen at all. At all. Ben-Hur ends up competing in the Colosseum. He wins. He kind of knocks Masala off. It's very, very dramatic. There are lots of chariots flying everywhere. But Masala gets knocked off his chariot and is possibly dead, but then not actually dead. And Ben-Hur is like, hooray! And that's all very exciting. And then afterwards, Masala and Judah reunite and reconcile. It's very nice, very loving. We find out before the chariot race, actually, I missed this, that Tisra and Naomi, his mother and sister, weren't actually killed. A kindly Roman rescued them, somehow diverted them from crucifixion into a prison somewhere. Fantastic. They're alive. They're alive, but they have leprosy, which is a problem. So Ben-Hur is going to try and free them, obviously. And after the chariot race is all done, we get kind of a cut to Jesus again, who's being marched out to be crucified. And he falls down. And the gentleman who helps him and gives him water and picks him back up again is Ben-Hur. Foreshadowing. And when Jesus is crucified, Ben-Hur is just standing there like crying because he finally sees that actually peace is the way forward. We shouldn't be trying to kill our enemies. We should be trying to befriend them and understand them and all this kind of stuff. And Jesus dies. It starts raining. And this rain is magical rain from God, probably, because it heals Naomi and Esther. They don't have leprosy anymore. Sheikh Morgan Freeman goes to the prison and releases them. He pays a bunch of money to the Roman prison guards and they get freed and they have a lovely family reunion. And then everyone leaves Jerusalem, presumably to go and be Christians, the first Christians. And it kind of ends there. Yes. Lexi, thoughts? What did I miss?
No, you summarized it pretty well. I guess I'll just dunk into the most interesting part that I thought of. And I would say, obviously I didn't. This is hard because, yes, it's Romans, but I'm also like, okay, this is like Romans in Judea. And I definitely did not study this part of the world. I did not study the relationships and what was going on. So it's a bit hard to talk about. But I will harp on the thing that I do sort of remember learning in school. And that's the actual chariot race, because that's kind of the big climactic event where Judah Ben-Hur gets to face his brother. So there were a couple of details that I noticed that they actually got right, which I was kind of like shocked about, considering so much of this. I was like, okay, because I will just say, like, the biggest anachronism was like the very modern looking clothes that they were clothed in at some point. Like that one scene, I think it's when Judah is riding into the city, when Masala is back, whatever he's wearing, I was like, this is the most, I was like, you're wearing pants. You are wearing modern looking pants.
There were lots of trousers, yeah.
With a very modern looking shirt and a very modern looking belt. I was like, I'm sorry. Honestly, the whole film, I was like, this is not period appropriate. This does not look like something you would wear. I thought I saw like a zipper at one point on a piece of clothing. I probably didn't. I don't know. Either way. So other than the clothing though, the chariot races, I took a class on ancient sport and spectacles, and we did learn about the chariot racing, but this was more in the context of the ancient Olympics in ancient Greece. But you know what? It's fine, because the Greeks originated the idea of the tethrippon, which is the 4-horse chariot race, 4 horses, 1 driver. I mean, they did have a different horse race with 2 horses. So I thought it was interesting that they chose to go for the full tethrippon, which I liked. Things I noticed were when they were doing the laps around what I can only assume was like the Judean version of the Circus Maximus, because this was like a huge ass like hippodrome that looked very out of place for like a small provincial place. So I was kind of confused, but okay, fine. So it's their version of the Circus Maximus. The kind of those bronze water jugs that look like fish that would pour.
The fish things, they were amazing. I loved them. Are they real?
So I don't remember those being real in terms of counting laps. Like I think that is not how they would have done it. They look nice though. But what was interesting is that if I counted correctly, and again, I was playing Tetris, so I had to look up very quickly and try to count. But I think there were 7 fish with the water, which actually would have been pretty historically right, because the Greeks, they would do 12 laps historically, but by the time of the Romans, they would do 7 traditionally, but sometimes they could do 5 laps. But I think I counted 7, and I said, that would be a small but historically accurate thing. 7 laps. Oh my God, like that's incredible. And then I thought about, okay, so why does this seem very Greek to me? And then I realized that the Romans borrowed the idea of chariot racing from the Etruscans, but the Etruscans actually got it from the Greeks. So I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, so I can trace the path of descent. It was so cool. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But again, there's some notable differences. Well, I was also trying to put the timeline in my head, because I was like, okay, this is around the time of Jesus. So then with the calendar and all, it starts when he's born at 0, but then Jesus dies at, 33? I don't remember. Whatever, early 30s. So then I would have been like, okay, so then by that calendar, this would be year like 33 or whatever. And then I was like, wait, well, when did chariot racing? So I did have to do a little Google around or check my notes. But it made sense, because chariot racing did not fade in importance until the splitting of the empire, and actually the fall of the western half of the empire, because I believe that it finally came to an end in like 500 something, closer to 600, I think. But the Ostrogoths were essentially in charge of Rome at that point when they were like, what's this tradition? Get rid of it. So I was like, okay, so the timelines are right. And then the only thing I didn't remember seeing was, so in Roman chariot racing, which was very much like the Greek one, you could race as an individual, but more popularly, it was not quite as individual as the Greek times when you would definitely race for yourself. If I remember, like the long history of Roman chariot racing was that like you would have teams color coded. So you have like the green, the blue, the yellow
Red,
faction for chariot racing. And so I thought that was really interesting. So, you know, I guess, again, it's like Judea. So does it really matter? Probably not.
But it's interesting to note the differences, though, because this is very much the way it's portrayed in this film is it's completely done along ethnicities, right? You have Masala racing for the Romans. You've got an Egyptian, like presumably racing for the Egyptians, who knows? But each person is like, it's not just a bunch of locals. People have traveled to represent like their people group almost, it seems like.
Yeah, I just thought it was a little strange because, like, yeah, you want like when they said this dude from Egypt, and then he has like a very Egyptian looking thing, and then they were like, and we have someone from Greece, we have the Greek here, and then we have the Roman, and then we have the, you know, I just thought it was interesting because I'm like, well, traditionally, yes, you would have team color, blue, green, red, whatever, but the thing is, it's like spectators. They would normally like support people based on like a single team. So you'd be like, I'm blue faction. So I just found it interesting that it wasn't more spelled out. Because obviously you could see like you had the hometown guy from Judea, it was Ben-Hur, but like, I don't know. I thought it was interesting that I'm like, well, you could just put a blue thing on his chariot and be like, okay, blue faction, woo. I mean, but you know, I'm nitpicking because I'm a history nerd. But you know, I generally like the portrayal of the race. I thought it was interesting. So this is something that I think we'll see when we watch Gladiator, but from my memory, usually because there was a lot of money to be made in this sport, in this entertainment, you know, you would get like imperial subsidies of like bread and stuff because you would want to keep the masses entertained, distracted, and whatever. And so I kind of wish there was someone like throwing bread to the crowd and being like, okay, here's your bread, and now we will have the race.
It was very much portrayed as like a Roman excess, not something that the locals were terribly interested in or really wanted. It was something that Rome imposed.
Yes, like I think it started like that because obviously you have to introduce like your subsidiary provinces to like Roman things, and obviously they made a big deal about how like they did not like the Romans being there. But I guess, you know, depending on how long they've been there, you know, by now it's normalized, and then like the people there would have just been like, yeah, cool. So I mean, some of those things didn't really make sense, but I think I was more confused as to why there's a random Shrike in the Ionian Sea who is just there. And then when Judah washes up and he essentially says, look, your racing horse has like a healed injury or like a minor injury in her leg. You should fix this. You know, I'm kind of like, oh, okay. So there's just like random Shrike.
Just hanging out as you do.
Hanging out as one does. And the thing is, it's like, I understand that you would start in the provinces because you couldn't, especially if you were like a nobody, you wouldn't just go right to Rome because Rome was definitely reserved for like the most famous, accomplished competitors. But I was still just like, and he had to go to Judea. Why? Like I don't know if it would track historically. I'm like, well, if he's in the Ionian Sea, wouldn't he go to Greece? You could go down to Egypt. I don't know. Maybe it was because it was geographically close. It just serves a narrative. Here's the thing. I'm willing to give the story a bit of grace because I know it's based on a book and it's based on the Ben-Hur and I think that, what is it, in Christ, Jesus, something. Whatever the original title was, it's like it's very biblical. So I was like, okay, they probably have to follow narrative. So it's probably kind of like the eagle, which we covered last week or a couple weeks ago. So like they probably had some things that they just had to put in for plot wise, which fine. So I'm giving it a pass on that. But you know, there's smaller details that, you know, I'm like, okay, it's a little odd. I mean, you know, for what they have for the historical nuggets or the biblical nuggets, I mean, okay, it tracks. Like, sure, Pontius Pilate, yeah, that's accurate. He was there in Judea. The thing that is interesting to me is that if you're going to do like a biblical tale, why not put in the actual details that people are familiar with or that matter, unless your intent is to definitely stage your own story, but put this other very big plot. Like at the end, when like Jesus is clearly being condemned and crucified, there's not really a mention of like, because I was very confused. I mean, okay, I wasn't confused because I know the history, but I would have been confused because I would have been like, so Pilate and the Romans just put him in chains and then did this, and who are all these people gathering? Are you saying that all these like random people who I'm going to assume are like the Jews of Judea are all very sad? So is it just the Roman? Like, I don't know, because one of the most contentious things we talk about or fight about, I guess, is, you know, who's responsible, right? And you're like, well, yes, it was the Romans, but also there was a council of Jewish elders who had to approve him being killed because they didn't want the problem. But then if you have, you know, a character being like, no, I'm going to side with the zealot. So I'm like, so what is the message? Is it that they all supported him and it's just like, I don't know. It's a little interesting. I mean, maybe it's trying to do justice to the fact that, you know, people like to blame the Jews for killing them. And they're like, okay, we're going to overcorrect and be like, nope, they all wanted him saved. It's just the Romans. Like,
They all left him.
Fine. If that's your political message, then fine. I think it was just a little weird, clunkily done, but I hate the fact that to bring biblical things in anyway. But I mean, you know, and then there's like the fantastical elements of like his mother and sister somehow became lepers in a dark, dank prison, which magical rain heals them. I'm also like, look, I'm not a doctor. I don't know leprosy. All I'm going to say though is like, can you get leprosy if you're just like locked in a dark room? Because to me,
I think it's a contact thing.
Okay.
I think.
Okay. Because I'm like, for some reason, I feel like it was genetic. No, unless you share, like, I thought it was like bodily fluids or sharing. Okay, whatever. Okay, either way, I don't know what it is, but I'm just kind of like, okay, well, you could have made that a little more clear, just because I'm a little confused. Because to me, I'm like, look, if you just throw someone in a prison because that's the thing, even if it's a contact thing, then it's like, it would easily spread because there's so many people around each other. But they were the only like 2 in the entire facility. So it's hard to suspend my reality.
I assumed they were put in solitary confinement after they showed signs of leprosy so they wouldn't spread it to other people.
I mean, maybe. I just wish that was clearly defined, because the Roman soldier who like stopped them from being crucified, was the way he implied it was like, I intercepted them, I saved them, and then I moved them here. Right. And so to me, if that's like what I'm getting from this interaction, then I'm like, so you literally took them from being on the way to being crucified, and then you threw them in this dungeon. And if they're the only 2 there, I mean, yeah, okay, maybe there were people with leprosy there before who like died, and so, you know, they were there, but they're not. But I don't know. It's just, I was like, this makes it really hard to believe. But, you know, I guess the magic rain is harder to believe than the why are they there with leprosy if they're locked in a dark room? I don't know. I really tried to focus really on the racing part because I'm a horse girl. I like that stuff. The sport and spectacle part is really the draw for me. I don't know. Was there anything historical particularly that you kind of hyper fixated on? For me, it was the races, but
honestly, the whole Jesus thing. For listeners who don't know, one of my other podcasts is Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman, who is a leading expert on New Testament scholarship. So I've learned a hell of a lot in the past year and a half, nearly 2 years, interviewing him. And it's so clearly ahistorical. It's based on like a modern understanding of Jesus and what Christians want him to have been when he was alive. Like, he wasn't in Jerusalem 3 years before his death. He had probably only just started his ministry at that point. He was out in rural Galilee. He's definitely not helping random Jewish princes because they fall down or talking to them in the streets for whatever reason. He's in Galilee. And then you skip forward 3 years and he's still in Jerusalem. And he's got this woman as a follower doing all of these like stereotypically Christian things, right? Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, giving her money to the poor, which, yes, he did preach. That was an expected thing. People got up, followed him and gave their money away. But he was also an apocalypticist. So he was preaching the end of the world. And none of that comes through. And it obviously doesn't come through because I don't think that's something that's in the public Christian consciousness about him as an historical figure. But to have a film set in that time period and to have him be just someone who's going around being nice to people, like, actually, no, he's preaching the end of the world. He's turning over tables in temples. Like, connect him more explicitly to the zealots that have caused this whole problem in the first place. The zealots are the reason, right, that Judah is arrested. I think they wanted us to make that connection as an audience to somehow link the two. But I feel like it would have been a more powerful film if that connection was made more explicit. And I'm not saying for a second that Jesus was connected to a group of religious zealots who went around attacking Romans, because he wasn't. But if you're going to try and have the audience make that connection, just go all the way and do it. Ugh, I'm not sure any of that made a lot of sense. It just irritated me, having Jesus there, and then having the whole final quarter of the movie was like Ben-Hur's redemption arc. And it's a redemption arc because he finds Jesus, right? In the beginning of the movie, he's this moral, upstanding Jewish guy who is saying, no, we can't attack the Romans. We have to be good and kind and do our best. Fantastic. Then he gets enslaved by them and quite understandably kind of goes the opposite direction. But then it's Jesus who kind of brings him back to goodness and the light. And I'm like, the idea that you can't have redemption without Jesus is really irritating. And even if that wasn't their purpose in including that section in the film, it's how it comes across. And it's really annoying. It's really preachy, in all honesty. And then having all of them, the whole family and Sheikh Morgan Freeman leaving together, it's not explicit again, but the feeling I got as I was watching was that they're all going off to found a Christian colony somewhere. It was just, it was irritating. Irritating is the best word.
Something that I looked up and found after was because I was looking through some interviews with actors and the director and stuff to see if they had said anything about it. And so one of the interesting things is I found a quote that I'll read for the audience and for you, since you didn't bookmark it as well. But the director in an interview said, "This movie is about the Roman Empire, how seductive and glamorous and dangerous its ideas are. It's about power and competition. And we live in this world. We live in the Roman Empire today. And this movie is trying to find a way how we can survive today. It's not a movie about Jesus's time. It's a movie about us." So I took that and I tried to think about, okay, let me reframe the film after reading that quote. I don't really agree with that quote. I'm like, I mean, okay, yeah, I guess you could be like, it's about the Roman Empire and how it's powerful, seductive, and competitive, but there's lots of different ways to do that.
And the message that is coming across in either case as to how we can combat the seductiveness of the Roman Empire in modern society is Jesus. If you're taking it from that viewpoint and that's how you're understanding it, it's a fucking evangelical propaganda movie.
Yeah, because essentially he said he wanted to stress the themes of forgiveness and love rather than vengeance, which is what he felt that the 1959 film focused too much on the vengeance and not enough about the forgiveness aspect. But I'm just like, but Rome wasn't in a forgiving mood. I mean, I guess, okay, if you really want to distinguish your character from Rome, Rome was not forgiving. Rome sucked. Rome took slaves. Rome did a lot of bad shit. And so, if you want a character who's like, I'm going to forgive, I'm like, fine. But I personally don't think it's realistic to expect that someone who had this done to him in his life, but also just anyone living at the time when the Roman Empire was there, I don't believe you would just be like, oh yes, peace and love and peace. It's like you're asking your dude to have a hippie attitude and be all about love and peace in a time where you're like, yeah, the world around me sucks. Life sucks. I've been wronged. I was a slave for fucking 5 years on a ship. You wanted to crucify my family. In my experience as a human being, I'm like, you react to how the world treats you. So if the world treats you shittily, literally, what's in it for you in this cruel world if you're like, I'm going to suddenly be nice when no one else is going to do that? I'm sorry. I'm just like, look, human beings are reactive. And it's just like, if people in the world show you kindness, you're going to be kind. And if they don't, they don't. I've been watching a shit ton of like Law and Order because, you know, that's my like guilty pleasure. And I'm like, look, I've seen so many episodes in the last like week of watching the show, you know, a couple episodes every night. And I'm like, nah, man, if you want to make it a movie about us, I'm like, well, then you've captured a weird side of humanity. Cause I'm like, no, the crueler people are, the crueler you're going to turn out. I'm sorry. You're going to turn into like Charles Manson. Maybe not that bad, but like, this is just a really hilariously bad take, in my opinion. I'm just like, I'm sorry. There's no way you can convince me that the Roman Empire, like, that you'd live in a time where they were lording themselves over you and you'd be like, peace and love, love and peace. Like, Jesus was, I guess, the only outlier and his disciples. But Ben-Hur is not a disciple of his. So you can't convince me that, like, yes, this is him.
Jesus also thought that the Roman Empire was going to end imminently, though. So the reason he's not out there preaching warfare is because, as far as he's concerned, God is about to come down and destroy all of his enemies. Like, he doesn't need to do anything about the Romans. God's going to do that in the next year or so.
Yeah. So I don't know. I find it very odd that this director goes on record to say that he thinks the most important values of like pride and power, dictatorship and rivalry and strength were like the most prominent parts of the Roman Empire. And I'm like, according to you and who? I mean, yeah, I'm not saying he's wrong. I mean, those things all definitely show up in Roman history, but if you're saying that that's what's happening and then you're trying to make a movie and not make it Christian propaganda thing, I have questions, a lot of questions. Yeah, I don't know. So it's not historical. You know, again, I'm like, I don't know if there was a historical consultant on this. There probably was. But I'm almost going to guess that if there was any kind of historical consultant, they would have been like a biblical scholar and probably not a Roman historian. Or maybe they use both. I don't know. Because I mean, like, okay, getting the chariot details right. I was like, well, I guess you'd maybe have a Roman historian, because I don't know if a biblical scholar would be like, and they had the Tethrapon with 4 horses, and they had 7 laps instead of 12. Like, I don't know if your standard biblical scholar is going to just like know that, but like any kind of adaptation, it's a bit odd to me how like I can spot very specific little historically accurate nuggets, and then it's surrounded by like a bunch of just blatant like, what is this? I don't believe this. This is completely anachronistic. You know, so I'm kind of just like, what the fuck is this movie? Because I'm like, you've got some small details right. Why couldn't you get a few bigger details right?
What's with the rest of it? Yeah.
But also the other complaint I had, I guess, is when we get a look at like Ben-Hur's big ass rich house, literally all of the furniture, the decoration, it looked like a fucking fancy Roman villa. And now I'm like, they're not Roman. That's the thing. They're Jewish. So why would they be living in a place where all the furniture looks like you would literally find it in a Roman senatorial house is my question. I mean, I understand things and styles travel, but like, again, they didn't like the Romans. It's in Judea. It's very far. Why? Why is there like a Roman bed there?
I don't know. I don't know enough about material culture in this time to really notice stuff like that.
I try not to, but like, man, it's kind of inescapable at some points. But these are the small things that, to me, in my opinion, I'm like, you don't even need to be an expert. I don't know. It was kind of like, I think it was, if you're watching, you know, a film about Egypt and then but it's set in like the Hellenistic period or the Roman period, and then you just see like a pair of perfectly gleaming put together pyramids, and you're like, I'm not an expert, but that is not right, you know. Or it's like seeing Corinthian columns in like archaic Greece, and you're like, that does not look correct. So to me, I'm just like, fancy, very Roman things that, like, if I was watching a film set in Rome, I would expect to see this. Then my brain just goes, but this is not Rome. The time is off. Why is this here? I mean, and even the ships didn't look right either. He was supposedly in the Ionian Sea fighting Greek ships. They all look the freaking same to me. I'm like, that's not correct. I mean, maybe in this time period, fine. It's different from like classical Greece, but I'm still just like, I'm pretty sure that's not correct. But I'm not an expert in naval warfare, but I'm like, that looks like a Roman merchant ship. There were just a lot of inaccuracies. But you know what? The horses were pretty.
The horses were lovely.
The one thing I kind of was a little confused about in terms of horse stuff is Ben-Hur's team is a set of 4 pure white horses. Do they realize that white horses are super susceptible to getting skin cancer because of the white pigmentation? Like, it's so white that like they have to be protected, and it's a bitch to deal with to keep them healthy because yes, they fucking get cancer so easily, unlike black horses or brown horses. So I just find it funny that I'm like, so this Shrike just has this like gleaming team of white horses and then does not stable them or protect them or put them somewhere where they're...
It's how you know they're Jesus horses.
Oh, yes.
They're the good guys because they're white.
Right.
I mean, I have no idea if that's true.
Yeah, I just thought it was strange.
I'm pretty sure Masala drives a team of all black.
He does. And I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah. But I mean, look, it's a really small, really nitpicky thing that you would know if you are like a horse person. If you don't, then you're like, oh, it looks good for the screen. I mean, you know, I'd have this complaint about any kind of white horse, though. Let's just say, if you want to really hear me get into horse criticism, just wait until we get to Clash of the Titans and that black Pegasus, man.
I'm looking forward to this.
I have thoughts. So, yeah. Yeah, so the white horse thing was lovely and pretty for the screen. But I was like, honey, depending on how long those horses would be there, one of them's probably got cancer. But they were lovely. And, you know, I was impressed by the CGI of the race. My favorite shot of the entire film is when the camera pans up and Ben-Hur's like being dragged behind and he's looking up at Masala's team of horses, which are coming like right on top of him. And it's a really cool shot because you see kind of the harness, you see racing upward. And I was very curious to see like, how did they film that? Like, did they rig a camera and then put it like attach it to the back of the chariot? So then it was like, you know, one of those GoPro shots where you kind of like attach it and then you can like stick it under when you clearly have horses coming. Like, all I know is like, I like to say I'm a cinephile. So I will watch any kind of behind the scenes things I can get my hands on for almost anything because I'm just really fascinated by the magic of film. But yeah, so that was a really cool shot.
Seeing the nuts and bolts behind things is actually really interesting.
Oh, yeah, I love it. And hopefully, you know, that's when I'm like, are you going to tell me sneak peek into like the costume decisions? What's historically accurate? Are you going to do an interview with the historian? Like sometimes I look for these nuggets, but yeah. Also, can I just say that when he cuts his hair at the end, it's like a really modern haircut. And I'm like, how did you get your hair to look like that? With the like crude scissor things or no, it's like he had a knife. I was like, you're cutting your hair with a knife and you're going to get hair like that good? I'm sorry. When I get bored of a film or when I see things that make me cringe, then my mind just wanders to like the most random things like, oh, how did you cut your hair like that?
It's a good question.
You know, it's fine. So anyway, I don't know. Did you have any favorite things, cool shots, things that your mind wandered to since, you know, the historical and even just mythological kind of folktale-y basis of the thing was just okay?
I mean, it was a fine action movie. It was okay. I enjoyed Morgan Freeman. I always enjoy Morgan Freeman. I did feel like the relationship between Judah Ben-Hur and Masala was, I don't know, it could have been done better. Like, they go from being bestest friends in the whole world to, I'm throwing you in jail. I mean, yes, Masala kind of had his hand forced because he's a Roman officer now and there were Roman soldiers watching and his superior was there, but like, he kind of flies to anger, even in the private moments with him and his brother. He flies to anger very, very quickly and accusing Judah of like not understanding or not helping or whatever. And I'm like, you grew up here, kid. You've only been in Rome's army for 3 years. The rest of your life, as far as we're aware, has occurred in Jerusalem. I feel like he'd have more sympathy towards his family and towards the people of Jerusalem than he's shown as having. He goes off to fight for Rome and then just becomes a fully integrated, fully paid up member of the Roman imperial machine. And yes, I know a lot can happen in 3 years and It's very possible, but it didn't feel terribly authentic.
Yeah, even the Roman military structure, because the thing is, I'm like, okay, so 3 years, the armor is always like, pick what looks nicest and what you think is like an ideal Roman officer, but like you don't know. Because I'm like, so was he just like a random centurion? Because I'm like, okay, at the best of times, if you get like because it showed Masala being like field promoted in that one scene, right, where they're like, these men are yours. So I was like, okay, so let's say you're like a Deturion. You get a small command, I think. But I mean, okay, let's just say for argument's sake, he's a centurion. I'm like, you would command 50 men at the most. You're not the highest ranking. There's a ton of centurions. You definitely wouldn't command a legion. So I'm kind of just like, maybe it's different in the provinces and I would need to consult an actual expert, but I just find it very unrealistic that Masala would suddenly become the governor, Pontius Pilate's like one of his top officers. Like, I just find it a bit strange. Unless you're like part of the personal guard of like a really high ranking person, like even a centurion, I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're in charge of 50 men, but you're like a grunt.
He seems to go up quickly in the Roman ranking system, and yeah, the whole thing was very, I know it's a plot device, I know it was necessary, but it was not terribly believable.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I'm just trying to nitpick for what can I tie to history, but I'm just like, look, unless he was explicitly, there's no Praetorian Guard because it's not an emperor. It's literally a governor of a province. So unless they streamlined the promotion and access to regional governors, that might make sense. But I'm still just like, I don't know. Would a centurion have access to like the governor? I mean, then if he did, I'd be like, well, then he's got to be like the only Roman legion there to sort of be the protection. But I'm also like, but again, then if you're part of that, like, I don't know, based on kind of how Masala was treated and where he is, it didn't seem like he was the top officer in charge. He was just one of many, which then leads me to be like, okay, so if he's one of many, there's no way that he'd have that immediate relationship or access. Like, honestly, why the fuck would Pilate choose him to be the like Roman representative? Now, maybe it's a plot thing. Maybe they're like, he was just recognized to be the best chariot racer in that legion that was there. But I find it curious because I'm like, well, I feel like Pilate would have, like, he would have supported any Roman, not just Masala. So I'm kind of like, is it like just based on like Roman legionary structure? I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I get it.
So would you recommend this movie to people?
I mean, if you want just like a fun, historically set, like sword and sandal type thing, sure. It's not a bad film. I did think that the actor playing Judah did a good job. He got the shift in like moral positioning, maybe. I thought that was pretty good. I disliked the religious bent, but I mean, that's a personal preference. If you don't have a problem with Jesus randomly showing up in Jerusalem 3 years before he should, then sure. I mean, it wasn't a bad film. How about you?
Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. It's a basic, swords and sandals flick. If you don't care about shoving religious characters in, I mean, put it this way. I think I would have liked it more if they stayed centered on Judah. I mean, it's not like it deviated a ton because it really mostly was him, but it's just like, did you have to make his wife a follower of Jesus? Did you have to like randomly insert Jesus as the one to give him water? Then did you have to have Ben-Hur's kind of, forgive the phrase, come to Jesus moment literally at the cross?
It was too predictable.
Right.
It was kind of kitschy.
Right. And so I'm like, look, I didn't read the original novel, but I'm sure that they're just following the plot points set out by it. So there's not a lot of leeway, but I'm just kind of like, oh man. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't like the religious bend, but again, based on a novel that seems by its title quite religious. So I'm like, okay, fine. I just think that, can we please not call it a Roman Empire movie? Like,
because it's not.
Because it's not. Like, I would be like, let's just call it Passion of the Christ, but you miss everything except for the end because you're being distracted by a chariot race. I don't know. Something. I don't know. Yeah, that's
Perfect.
what I thought.
Yes, I did. Obviously, when you're working with source material, you don't want to make a completely different story. I think it would have been a better story without Jesus. I think it would have been more about the nature of humanity and relationships, and it would have been fascinating to see what they then could have done with Judah's sister and mother if they have leprosy. Like, what happens to them? Like, having them miraculously cured just kind of disappears one of the more emotionally, maybe not relevant, because I don't know anyone with leprosy, but like, we can all relate to a family member being sick and how we then deal with that difficulty. I think that would have been much more interesting, honestly.
You know, you could tell it falls prey to like the trope of like, and it must end with a happy ending, because again, like he goes to see his brothers, like, I forgive you. Look, if you got your leg cut off because of this accident, I don't think you're gonna suddenly be like, brother, I love you, and now everything's fine, and I'm gonna go off with my adopted family because you fought for 3 years to become Roman again, and suddenly you're like, I lost a leg, fuck you, I'm leaving.
Actually, JK, don't care. I'm going to be an Israelite again.
So I just think that it definitely was probably written like, right, and they had to follow the book to the point where they were like, yes, and now everyone must have a happy ending tied up in a pretty bow. But one thing I'm kind of at a loss for is it feels a bit disconnected, because also like Esther was supposed to have become, you know, a Jesus follower, and then so she gets disconnected because Judah wants revenge, and she's like, I can't reconcile, and then so she magically sees him at the end crying at the foot of the cross, and then is like, all is forgiven, I'm gonna go back to my old life just because you decided to forgive your brother, and there's no problems. I'm like, is he changed for good? Is he changed just in this scenario because he made it about family? But like, if violence and other things happen later, like, does he go back to being violent? Like, you know, I have questions.
It was a good movie, but it's very two-dimensional, and the ending is, like you said, it's wrapping everything up in a pretty bow, and it's just not satisfying.
Like, there was no payoff.
It was amusing.
It was amusing.
Yeah, no.
If you like horses and you like racing, watch it. It's some good graphics.
The horses were cool.
And you know, I definitely don't know another film that really emphasizes the sort of chariot racing aspect, because, you know, it's the biggest part of the promotional material. It's like this big poster of him with the chariot. So I'm like, yeah, you know, you can be forgiven for thinking it's a whole thing about like ancient racing and whatever and sport. I mean, and I do appreciate that it is different from the other things we've seen on screen, right? This was in 2016, so the Russell Crowe Gladiator had been out for 16 years because that came out in 2000. And what you saw is Maximus got on the horse in his match, but there were only 2 of them, but it wasn't really like a chariot race. He just happened to have one to use to his advantage. So I like how it's like the premise is like, yeah, he's going to be racing in a Tethrapon, and I can count on one hand how many films I've seen that even portray or attempt to portray an ancient Tethrapon. So I was like really happy as a ancient sport and spectacles fan to see that and see it done pretty accurately from what I could tell. So there's aspects to like about it. You just have to suspend plot and just pay attention to like smaller details, and then you'll have a great time, is what I've found.
Absolutely. Entirely agreed. And we, I think, should finish up there. I think we've covered everything that I had wanted to cover.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I enjoyed it for what it was.
So, yeah, I did. I do worry that we can be relatively critical, and I think that's half the fun, honestly. I like complaining about bad movies to you. But most of what we watch and what we read, like, is enjoyable. It's not super historical, but it is enjoyable.
Yeah. So, you know, I would hope that people who like to listen to our show also enjoy us kind of complaining, because maybe we are also bringing up things that people have noticed and complain about. But at the same time, you know, I don't want to be too negative. Like, you know, I hope that we're not giving the impression that we're just going to watch everything and then shit on, you know, this could be someone's favorite film. And what I have to say is, please don't let us ruin the fact that it's your favorite film. We're just pointing out like historical and plot inaccuracies because we like to chew through things to make them make sense.
It's interesting to us. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's your favorite movie, it's not a bad one. It's really entertaining. Please continue to enjoy this film if it is a favorite of yours.
Absolutely. And that actually concludes our Season 3 Rome extravaganza. We will be back in a couple of months with Season 4, Heroes and Monsters. We've got some really great stuff for you. There's some Alexander the Great material, a Gilgamesh adaptation, and we are opening with the amazingly classic Clash of the Titans. Until then, you can reach us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com if you have suggestions for things we should be reading, watching, or drinking if you enjoy your tea as much as I do. Keep your eye on our social media channels for a release date, but we will be back very soon.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.